The real story behind World War II. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was the deadliest conflict in human history, claiming an estimated 70 to 85 million lives. It was not a sudden event caused by a single incident, but the result of decades of political humiliation, economic crisis, aggressive nationalism, and failed diplomacy. To understand the real story, we must look beyond the battlefield to the forces that made global war almost inevitable. 1. The unfinished peace. After World War I. The roots of World War II lie in the end of World War I. The Treaty of Versailles, 1919. Germany was blamed for the First World War and punished severely. It lost territory in all its overseas colonies. Its army was reduced to 100,000 men. It was forced to pay massive reparations. It was forbidden to unite with Austria. Many Germans saw this as a national humiliation. The Weimar Republic, Germany's new democratic government, was weak and associated with defeat. Extremist movements, especially Adolf Hitler's Nazi Party, exploited this anger by promising to restore German pride and power. Economic chaos. The Great Depression of 1929 devastated Europe. Unemployment soared. Democracies appeared powerless. Radical leaders offered simple, aggressive solutions. Economic despair became fertile ground for dictatorship not only in Germany, but also in Italy and Japan. 2. The rise of dictators and militarism. Adolf Hitler, Germany. Hitler came to power in 1933 promising to destroy the Treaty of Versailles, to rebuild the German military, to unite all German-speaking people, to create Lebensraum, living space in Eastern Europe. Nazi ideology was built on racism, especially anti-Semitism, and the belief that war was natural and necessary. Benito Mussolini. Italy felt cheated after World War I. Mussolini created a fascist dictatorship in 1922 and dreamed of rebuilding a new Roman Empire. Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, showing that the League of Nations was powerless. Imperial Japan sought raw materials and territory. It invaded Manchuria in 1931 and later China in 1937, committing brutal atrocities such as the Nanjing Massacre. These three powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, formed the Axis alliance. 3. The failure of appeasement. Britain and France, traumatized by World War I, wanted to avoid another war at almost any cost. Their policy became known as appeasement, giving in to Hitler's demands in hopes he would stop. Key steps toward war. 1936. Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland. 1938. Germany annexed Austria, Anschluss. 1938. Munich Agreement allowed Hitler to take the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. 1939. Hitler seized the rest of Czechoslovakia. Each time, the democracies protested but did nothing militarily. Hitler concluded they were weak. 4. The spark. Invasion of Poland. In August 1939, Hitler shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact with Joseph Stalin, secretly agreeing to divide Eastern Europe. On September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland using Blitzkrieg, lightning war. On September 3, Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. 5. The global conflict. Europe falls, 1939 to 1941. Poland was crushed within weeks. Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands fell. France surrendered in 1940. Only Britain, led by Winston Churchill, resisted during the Battle of Britain, Hitler's fatal mistake. The Soviet Union. In 1941, Hitler invaded the USSR. The Eastern Front became the largest and bloodiest theater in history. Soviet resistance at Moscow, Stalingrad, and Kursk eventually broke the German army. The war expands. Pearl Harbor. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war, turning it into a truly global conflict. The Holocaust behind the fighting. Nazi Germany carried out the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, millions of Poles, Roma, disabled people, and political prisoners. The Holocaust revealed that the war was not only about territory, but about ideology and human survival. Turning points 1942 to 43, Stalingrad, Midway, El Alamein, 1944, D-Day invasion of France, 1945. Soviet forces reach Berlin. Hitler committed suicide in April 1945. Germany surrendered on the 8th of May 1945. The end in the Pacific. The U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima, the 6th of August 1945. Nagasaki, the 9th of August 1945. Japan surrendered on the 2nd of September 1945. 6. Why the war really happened. The deeper truth. World War II was not caused only by Hitler. It resulted from a punitive peace, Versailles, which created resentment instead of reconciliation, economic collapse, that destroyed faith in democracy, nationalism, and racism, turning politics into a cult of hatred, weak international institutions. The League of Nations had no power, appeasement, and fear. Democracies acted too late. Totalitarian ideologies, Nazism, fascism, and Japanese militarism glorified violence. It was a failure of the entire international system. 7. The consequences. Europe lay in ruins. The United States and Soviet Union became superpowers. The Cold War began. The United Nations was created. Decolonization, accelerated human rights laws, emerged after the Holocaust. Nuclear weapons changed the meaning of war forever. 8. Life on the home front. World War II was the first truly total war. Civilians were not just witnesses, they became targets and participants. Britain cities like London, Coventry, and Liverpool were bombed during the Blitz. Families lived in shelters and subway stations. Rationing controlled food, clothing, and fuel. Women entered factories in huge numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. Germany Nazi propaganda controlled every aspect of life. Dissent meant imprisonment or death. By 1944, Allied bombing turned cities like Dresden and Hamburg into ruins. Even teenagers and elderly men were forced to fight in the final months. United States factories were converted to produce tanks, planes, and ships. Unemployment disappeared after the Depression. Over 120,000 Japanese Americans were placed in internment camps, showing that fear also damaged democracy. Soviet Union entire industries were moved east beyond the Ural Mountains. Civilians endured starvation during the siege of Leningrad, where more than 1 million died. The Soviet population suffered the greatest losses of any nation. 9. The major fronts of the war. The Eastern Front, a war of extermination. The conflict between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was unlike any other. Hitler planned to enslave or destroy Slavic peoples. Einsatzgruppen, death squads, followed the German army, murdering Jews and civilians. Battles were fought with unimaginable brutality. Stalingrad, 1942-43, became the turning point. An entire German army was surrounded and destroyed. From then on, the Red Army advanced westward toward Berlin. The Western Front, liberation of Europe. The Allies landed in North Africa and Italy, 1942-43. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, 150,000 Allied troops stormed Normandy. Paris was liberated in August 1944. The Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last gamble. By spring 1945, Allied forces closed in from both east and west. The Pacific, island by island. The Pacific War was fought across oceans. After Pearl Harbor, Japan conquered Southeast Asia. The U.S. adopted island hopping, capturing strategic islands like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Japanese soldiers often fought to the death, believing surrender was dishonor. The war in the Pacific was marked by extreme racism and ferocity on both sides. 10. Technology and the new face of war. World War II transformed warfare. Tanks and blitzkrieg, fast coordinated attacks using armor and aircraft. Strategic bombing targeted entire cities, radar and code breaking. Britain's breaking of the German Enigma code shortened the war. Medicine, penicillin and blood transfusions saved millions. The atomic bomb created a weapon capable of ending civilization. Science became as important as soldiers. 11. Resistance and collaboration. Not everyone accepted occupation. Resistance movements. French Maquis sabotaged railways. Polish Home Army rose in Warsaw. Yugoslav partisans under Tito fought a full guerrilla war. Ordinary people hid Jews, Allied pilots, and escaped prisoners. Collaboration, others cooperated with the Nazis. Vichy government in France. Local militias in Eastern Europe. Businesses that profited from slave labor. The war forced impossible moral choices on millions. 12. The Holocaust, the moral center of the war. The genocide of Europe's Jews was not accidental. It was central to Nazi plans. Stages. Discrimination, 1933 to 38. Laws stripping Jews of rights, ghettos, 1939 to 41. Starvation and segregation, mass shootings, 1941. In Eastern Europe, death camps, 1942 to 45. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor. Industrial methods were used to murder human beings. The discovery of the camps in 1945 shocked the world and changed ideas about civilization, evil, and responsibility. 13. The war ends, a broken world. By 1945, Germany was divided and occupied. Europe's old empires were finished. 40 million people were refugees. Cities from Warsaw to Tokyo were ashes. The Allies held the Nuremberg trials, declaring that leaders could be punished for crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity. A new concept of international justice was born. 14. From World War to Cold War. The alliance against Hitler collapsed quickly. The Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe. The United States led Western reconstruction through the Marshall Plan. Germany was divided into East and West NATO, and the Warsaw Pact formed. World War II did not bring lasting peace. It created a new nuclear standoff. Part 3, What World War II Really Meant. 15. Lessons of the conflict. Democracy can die through legal means. Hitler gained power using elections and laws before destroying them. Economic despair breeds extremism. Hunger and unemployment made hatred believable. Ignoring aggression invites larger wars. Appeasement turns small crises into global catastrophe. 17. The United States, from isolation to superpower. Before 1941, most Americans wanted to stay out of another European war. Memories of World War I were bitter, and Congress passed neutrality laws. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, however, believed Hitler had to be stopped. Steps toward War Lend-Lease Program, 1941. The U.S. supplied Britain and the USSR with weapons and food. Atlantic Charter. Roosevelt and Churchill outlined a vision of a democratic post-war world. U.S. Navy secretly protected Allied shipping against German submarines. Transformation after Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack united the nation overnight. U.S. industry became the arsenal of democracy. Car factories produced bombers and tanks. 16 million Americans served in uniform. Scientific projects like the Manhattan Project changed history. By 1945, the United States possessed half of the world's industrial production, the strongest Navy and Air Force, the atomic bomb. It emerged as a global leader rather than a distant republic. 18. The Soviet Union, the greatest sacrifice. No country suffered like the USSR. Around 27 million Soviet citizens died. 1,700 towns and 70,000 villages were destroyed. Whole populations were deported by Stalin on suspicion of disloyalty. Why the USSR won immense territory, allowed strategic retreat, rapid relocation of factories eastward, harsh winters that crippled the German army, ruthless but effective leadership. Stalin used the victory to justify total control over Eastern Europe, laying the foundation for the Cold War. 19. Britain, the island that refused to surrender. Britain stood alone against Hitler in 1940. The Royal Air Force defeated the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain. Churchill's speeches kept morale alive. The Empire supplied soldiers from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and the Caribbean. But Britain was exhausted by 1945. Bankrupt, financially dependent on American aid, unable to hold its empire for long. 20. China, the forgotten giant front. China had been fighting Japan since 1937, years before Europe's war began. Up to 15 to 20 million Chinese died. Cities like Shanghai and Wuhan were devastated. The nationalists and communists fought Japan, while also preparing for civil war. Chinese resistance tied down over 1 million Japanese troops, playing a crucial but often ignored role in Allied victory. 21. India, Africa, and the colonial world. More than 2.5 million Indian soldiers fought for Britain, the largest volunteer army in history. Indians fought in North Africa, Italy, and Burma. Promises of freedom were delayed, fueling independence movements. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed around 3 million. Worsened by wartime policies, African soldiers from Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, and South Africa also fought in Europe and Asia. The contradiction was clear. Colonial subjects were asked to die for freedom they did not have at home. After 1945, decolonization became unstoppable. 22. The Middle East, strategic heartland. The region was vital because of oil and supply routes. Britain and the USSR occupied Iran to secure oil fields. Iraq and Syria saw coups and unrest. Jewish and Arab tensions in Palestine intensified as Holocaust survivors sought refuge. Decisions made during the war directly shaped later conflicts, including the creation of Israel in 1948. 23. Latin America. Most Latin American countries eventually supported the Allies. Brazil sent troops to fight in Italy. Mexico provided pilots and raw materials. The region supplied food, copper, and rubber. The war strengthened U.S. influence across the Americas. Part 4. The Hidden Dimensions. 24. Propaganda. Controlling minds. All sides used massive propaganda. Nazi films portrayed Jews as subhuman Allied posters, demonized Hitler in Japan. Radio became a weapon as powerful as bombs. Truth was often the first casualty. 25. Women in the war. Women's roles changed forever. Factory workers, pilots, nurses, spies. Soviet women served as snipers and fighter pilots. After 1945, many were pushed back into the home, but the old world could not fully return. The modern women's rights movement grew from this experience. 26. Children of the war. Millions of children were evacuated from cities, grew up in orphanages, survived ghettos and camps, became refugees with no country. A generation learned fear before it learned hope. 27. Moral gray zones. The war was not a simple story of good versus evil. Allied bombing killed hundreds of thousands of German and Japanese civilians. The atomic bombs ended the war but opened an ethical nightmare. Stalin's regime was brutal even while fighting Hitler. Victory did not mean innocence. 28. Europe in ruins. In 1945, Europe looked like a continent at the end of civilization. Over 35 million Europeans were dead. Major cities, Warsaw, Berlin, Vienna, Rotterdam, were piles of rubble. Railways, bridges, and factories were destroyed. Millions wandered the roads as refugees and displaced persons. Old powers such as Britain and France were victorious but exhausted. Germany, once the heart of Europe, ceased to exist as a single state. The division of Germany. The Allies split Germany into 4 occupation zones: American, British, French, Soviet. By 1949, this became 2 countries: West Germany, Federal Republic, democratic, backed by the U.S. East Germany, GDR, communist, controlled by Moscow. The same division cut through all of Europe, soon called the Iron Curtain. 29. The birth of the United Nations. The League of Nations had failed to stop aggression. In 1945, leaders tried again. Goals of the UN: prevent future wars, protect human rights, promote international cooperation, give small nations a voice. The Security Council, with the US, USSR, Britain, France, and China holding veto power, reflected the reality of power politics. Peace now depended on cooperation between former allies who were already becoming rivals. 30. Nuremberg and the idea of international justice. For the first time in history, national leaders were judged by an international court. The Nuremberg trials declared that "I was only following orders" is not an excuse. Aggressive war is a crime. Crimes against humanity can be punished by the world. This became the foundation for modern international law and later courts such as The Hague. 31. Human Rights Revolution. The shock of the Holocaust created a new moral language. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed all humans are born free and equal rights do not depend on race, religion, or nationality. The state exists to serve people, not destroy them. Modern ideas about genocide, refugees, and human dignity grew directly from the war. 32. The Cold War begins. The alliance between capitalism and communism collapsed almost immediately. Two rival systems united states, democracy, free markets, Soviet Union, one-party rule, state economy. Europe became the front line. Marshall Plan rebuilt Western Europe. NATO military alliance formed in 1949. Warsaw Pact answered in 1955. Berlin became the symbol of division. World War II ended with peace, but also with the constant fear of nuclear annihilation. 33. The Atomic Age. Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the meaning of war. A single bomb could destroy a city. Superpowers built thousands of nuclear weapons. Strategy shifted from victory to deterrence. Humanity now had the power to end its own story. 34. The end of empires. Colonial soldiers returned home asking a simple question. If we fought for freedom in Europe, why not freedom here? Between 1945 to 1975, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Kenya, Algeria, and dozens more gained independence. European empires collapsed, new nations were born, often with borders drawn by old colonial powers. Creating future conflicts, World War II was the true beginning of the post-colonial world. 35. Economic transformation. The war also produced the World Bank and IMF modern welfare states in Europe. Scientific breakthroughs, computers, jet engines, antibiotics, rockets, mass production, and consumer society. Destruction became the strange father of prosperity. 36. Memory and trauma. Not all wounds healed. Survivors of camps carried lifelong scars. Veterans struggled with what they had seen. Families searched for missing relatives for decades. Entire cultures, especially Jewish communities of Eastern Europe, were gone forever. The war lived on inside people. Part 5. The Real Meaning of World War II. 37. Myths versus Reality. Myth 1. It was unavoidable reality. Choices by leaders and nations made it happen. Myth 2. Only Hitler caused it. Reality, global economic crisis, imperialism, Stalinism, and appeasement all played roles. Myth 3. The Allies were purely heroic reality. They committed their own injustices, bombing civilians, colonial oppression, atomic weapons. Myth 4. 1945 brought peace reality. It opened the Cold War and dozens of regional conflicts. 38. What the war teaches humanity: democracy is fragile. It must be protected daily. Hate can become policy if ordinary people stay silent. Technology without ethics is dangerous. International cooperation is necessary in an interconnected world. Every human life has equal value. The core lesson from the Holocaust. 39. World War II and today modern issues echo the 1930s. Economic inequality, refugee crises, propaganda and disinformation, aggressive nationalism, wars against civilians. The past is not dead, it is a mirror. Final conclusion. The real story behind World War II is not only about tanks, dictators, and dates. It is the story of how civilized societies collapsed, how ordinary people became killers or heroes, how hatred was organized like an industry, and how, after unimaginable suffering, humanity tried to invent a better order. The world we live in, its borders, its laws, its fears and hopes, was born between 1939 and 1945. Understanding that story is not about the past, it is about protecting the future.